Kirby Smart does not think that Georgia is as deep on the defensive line this year. I don't think that's much of a secret. I think that this is something that we've talked about a little bit over the last this offseason, right? Now we're getting to the point where the season is less than 2 weeks away, right? So this offseason is almost over. It's pretty much over. I can't wait for it to be over. And the defensive line is not as deep, all right? When you take Jalen Carter out of the equation and Bear Alexander out of the equation, and all you add are freshmen, yes, in a way, it's definitely not as deep in terms of experience. But you look at stats, you take into consideration injuries and what was really happening in the last couple of years, and you look at the NFL draft, and yeah, you look at this year's version of Georgia's defensive line, and no, it's not as deep. Do they have good players in that position? Yes, but this is a room that obviously Kirby feels, and I agree with him, that I don't think that this group is as deep as it's been the last couple of years. 2021 obviously is one of the deeper defensive lines ever, right? I think about the Clemson defensive lines when they were winning national championships a few years back. Those were really deep defensive lines. Alabama, 2015, 2016, 2011, 2012, right? Those defensive lines were really, really deep. And there's been a lot of really good defensive linemen in college football, but you think about units that were really good, and you think about Georgia's unit this year. Is there a superstar? That's been something that's been thrown around there. That's been something that's been talked about here. Is there a superstar? If there is one, they haven't emerged as a superstar quite yet. Now, I think that there are definitely a handful of players on Georgia's defensive line that have potential to be really good players. But Jalen Carter, obviously is the second batch, right, into the 2022 draft for their defensive line. Georgia lost a couple defensive linemen in 2021 to the 22 draft in Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt. And then they lost Jalen Carter. So they've got a couple guys go to the NFL. Bear Alexander leaving does not help that scenario, right? Now, look, I get on here, I talk about this. That does not mean Georgia's defensive line is bad. But maybe they're not as deep. Maybe they're not as good as they've been the last 2 years. This does not mean that Georgia's defensive line is bad. We'll get into that a little bit more. Ryan Curley from Dog Post here. Hey, look, real quick, make sure you are looking at the newsletter. That is free to sign up down below the newsletter. Every single day in your inbox, you're going to get stories from Dog Post sent your way, and it is free to sign up. You don't have to do anything but give us your email address, and right there, you got every Georgia Bulldog story you could want in your inbox every single day. It's free. Take advantage of the opportunity down below. You look at numbers from last year, and you look at Georgia's stats. You got to go down the list. When you're looking statistically, you're looking at tackles and sacks and all that. You got to go down the list a little bit to find the first defensive lineman. And the first defensive lineman was Nazir Stackhouse, 33 total tackles, right? 0 sacks. Doesn't look like any tackles for losses. No forced fumbles. So Nazir Stackhouse was the tackling leader for Georgia's defensive line. And I expect that to repeat. Possibly Michael Williams taking that, right? You consider him a defensive lineman as well, working a little bit closer to the outside than Nazir Stackhouse is more on the inside. But he's the first guy you see on that list. Now, Jalen Carter is right there, 32 total tackles. He had the 3 sacks. You obviously know that he's forced 2 fumbles. Yes, 2 fumbles. And there's an impact thing with him, right? There's an impact part of it where Jalen Carter definitely made an impact when he was on the field. Things were different. But you have to acknowledge, well, okay, Jalen Carter was banged up early in the season, and then in the middle of the season, right, he missed some games. What are some games he missed? I think he missed Auburn off the top of my head. He definitely missed Auburn and Vanderbilt because he did come back for that Florida game. So for sure he missed those 2. Got banged up in the Missouri game, obviously. So they played well without him. Now, Auburn and Vanderbilt weren't great teams, but they played well without that superstar. It'll be the same thing again this year. But Nazir Stackhouse is a guy who I believe was second team All-SEC last year. Is he going to make that jump and be an impact guy? Well, that's not necessarily the problem. Is who are the other guys that are going to play with him? Zion Logue, an older guy, is definitely going to be out there. Tramel Walthour, an older guy, definitely going to be out there. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, a guy that's been around for a couple of years now. He's definitely going to be out there. So what they have is they have people that have been around for a long time, but maybe it's not. But that's about it, right? Those are their players that have been impact players. But then you go further down with Brinson as another guy, but you have to go further down after those guys. And Georgia likes to rotate their defensive line. That is something that they have done a lot. You watch that. Jalen Carter was not out there every play, right? And there, I want to say he only played. There may have been a couple other downs, but go look at the Florida tape from last year. He played mostly just on third downs. Made an impact there. It is my understanding that they are not going to have as much freedom with their defensive line rotation because of the lack of experience in that room. It's not because of lack of talent, but they don't have a lot of guys who have played a lot. Because even Tremel Wathour, even Warren Brinson, even Nazir Stackhouse himself, it wasn't until last season where he played a bigger role. A lot of these guys just haven't played a ton. They weren't significant snap getters. Now, those guys have gotten snaps, but behind them, you go to freshmen on that list and you scroll down. Sean Washington recorded a tackle last year. He's no longer around. Bill Norton, I think the same thing, recorded a couple tackles last year. I think he also hit the transfer portal. So we're looking at where their production was, Barry Alexander. So the younger talent on the defensive line, that is all gone. They're all gone. I got cut off there, but here's how I want to wrap this up. I've got kind of a mock depth chart. It's not exactly pulled up here that I'm looking at, but behind guys like Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, Zion Logue, people that I think are definitely going to play. Christian Miller is a guy that I haven't talked about yet. Jonathan Jefferson, right? Those guys been in the program the last year. Redshirt sophomore for Jonathan Jefferson. Christian Miller will be a redshirt freshman heading into this season. So those guys are people that I think are going to get roped in there a little bit. Jordan Hall, freshman coming in. Jamal Jarrett, freshman coming in on the defensive line. These are guys that may see the field this year, right? Not every single year, but you do see if a freshman is a really, really good player, you see them get on the field. And I think that's going to be the case this year, right? If they think that Jamal Jarrett, they think that Jordan Hall is a really good player, they're going to let them be on the field. But I think more so this year than the last two seasons, part of that will be because of depth. Because that starting defensive line is not necessarily a bunch of first-round picks. And that is not a knock on these players. Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, Zion Logue, you guys, it's not, you've got more time to show the NFL what you got. But because they don't have as many guys that have played significant snaps this year, I do think younger players are going to get roped in. They like to rotate on this defensive line. So expect Jonathan Jefferson. Expect to see 94 on the field. Expect to see 52 on the field, Christian Miller. Don't be surprised if you see a couple freshmen like Jordan Hall and Jamal Jarrett on the field at times during this year when they want to rotate, especially early on when you get Georgia playing teams like UT Martin and Ball State, when they're going to be up by 30-plus points right in the second half. Those guys are going to get on the field and build confidence. It's what they want to do across the board. It's not just the defensive line. They want to build confidence in those guys so they can play. Newsletter down below. So we got cut off there.